Money isn't the biggest difference between rich people and poor people, and I know that's going to upset some people.
It probably should because income matters, but I have a feeling you're talking about something much deeper.
I am, because I've known people earning over $300,000 a year who still worried about every credit card bill.
And I've known families with perfectly ordinary incomes who quietly became financially independent because they treated money differently.
So maybe wealth isn't created the day you get a raise.
Maybe it's created by what you do before the next paycheck arrives.
Exactly, because every paycheck asks the same question. Will you spend me, save me, or grow me?
Most people never hear that question because they're too busy celebrating the deposit notification.
That's understandable though, because getting paid feels like progress.
It feels like progress, but feeling richer and becoming wealthier are often two completely different experiences.
That's a distinction people rarely make.
Imagine two friends who each receive a $5,000 bonus.
One immediately starts browsing for a newer SUV because the monthly payment looks manageable.
The other quietly adds part of it to an emergency fund, invests another portion, and enjoys a modest weekend trip without touching the rest.
What's fascinating is that both people believe they're rewarding themselves.
Years later, one owns memories and growing investments, while the other owns a larger monthly payment.
It's amazing how the same amount of money can create completely different futures.
That's why I think habits deserve more attention than income.
I agree, because income can change overnight, but habits usually follow you for decades unless you deliberately change them.
And once people understand that, they stop asking how rich people spend money and start asking how rich people think about money.
Here's a belief I'd challenge. Most people don't have a spending problem. They have a decision timing problem.
Explain that because those sound similar on the surface.
People often make financial decisions based on today's emotions instead of tomorrow's priorities.
Like buying something after a stressful week because it feels deserved.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying your money until enjoyment quietly becomes a habit of avoiding discomfort.
That's interesting because shopping sometimes becomes emotional relief instead of a practical purchase.
Businesses understand that psychology incredibly well.
That's why stores place tempting items near the checkout even when you never plan to buy them.
They aren't just selling products. They're selling convenience during a moment when your self-control is already tired.
Which explains why people leave a store wondering how they spent $50 extra.
I've done that before with groceries, and somehow snacks I never intended to buy kept finding their way into the cart.
The shopping cart has a strange talent for convincing us that future versions of ourselves will suddenly love expensive treats.
And future us usually wonders why present us was feeling so generous.
That's one of the funniest financial truths because the bill always arrives for decisions made by an optimistic version of ourselves.
Another habit I've noticed is that wealthy people often delay purchases without feeling deprived.
That sounds almost too simple to matter.
It sounds simple because waiting doesn't look impressive, but giving yourself even a few days separates genuine needs from temporary excitement.
It's amazing how many things stop feeling essential after you've had time to think.
Which raises a bigger question. If waiting can save hundreds or even thousands of dollars each year, why don't more people practice it?
Maybe because patience is one of the few financial skills that costs nothing to learn but still feels expensive to use.
Let me ask you something that makes people uncomfortable. If someone doubled your salary tomorrow, would your financial life actually improve 5 years from now?
Most people would immediately say yes, but I'm not convinced.
Neither am I, because income solves cash shortages, yet it doesn't automatically solve money habits.
That's lifestyle inflation, isn't it?
Exactly. Lifestyle inflation means your spending quietly rises every time your income does until the raise disappears.
It's almost invisible because nothing feels extravagant on its own.
That's the trap because it's rarely one giant purchase.
It's the nicer apartment, the upgraded phone plan, the premium streaming service, the weekly food delivery, and suddenly the raise has vanished.
And then people start saying they need another raise just to catch up.
Which is ironic because they're chasing the same feeling they had before the last raise.
I once heard someone say they finally felt successful after buying a luxury car.
Did that feeling last?
Not for long, because within a few months it simply became the car they drove to work every day.
That's something psychologists call adaptation, where today's excitement eventually becomes tomorrow's normal.
which explains why buying happiness is so much harder than buying expensive things.
Exactly, possessions have an incredible ability to become ordinary.
Meanwhile, owning investments creates a different kind of satisfaction because they quietly work even when you're asleep.
That's a strange idea when you first hear it, that your money can become another worker in your life.
And once people understand that, they stop measuring wealth by what they own and start measuring it by what they control.
That's the mindset shift that changes almost everything, because ownership often creates freedom while endless consumption usually creates obligations.
Here's something that confused me for years. People talk endlessly about making more money, but almost never about keeping more of it.
That's because earning money gets applause while quietly managing it rarely gets noticed.
Yet the second skill is usually the one that determines whether wealth actually lasts.
History is full of people who earned fortunes and still ended up broke.
Which proves that income and wealth aren't twins.
They're more like distant cousins who don't always get along.
That's a good way to put it because one is about what flows in and the other is about what stays.
And what stays has a chance to grow.
Exactly, because every dollar you keep can eventually start producing more dollars.
That's compound growth in simple terms, where your money earns returns and those returns begin earning returns too.
The funny part is that compound growth sounds boring until you realize time is doing most of the heavy lifting.
People underestimate time because it never sends them a notification saying, "Your patience just paid off." Imagine planting two identical trees on the same day.
One gets watered consistently while the other is watered only when someone remembers.
After several years, they won't look anything alike even though they started with the same potential.
That's exactly how financial habits work, because consistency beats occasional bursts of motivation.
Which is why trying to get rich quickly often distracts people from becoming wealthy slowly.
And ironically, the slow path is usually the one that has a better chance of succeeding.
It's not as exciting as chasing the next big opportunity, but excitement and effectiveness aren't always the same thing.
Maybe that's the biggest misunderstanding about wealth. It often looks ordinary while it's being built and only seems extraordinary after enough time has passed. Can I ask you something that always sparks debate?
Go ahead, because those are usually the conversations people remember.
Why do so many people see buying an expensive car as a financial milestone, but almost nobody celebrates building a 6-month emergency fund?
Because one is visible to everyone else and the other is visible only when life goes wrong.
That's fascinating because the smartest financial decisions are often the least impressive from the outside.
An emergency fund isn't exciting until your transmission fails or your employer announces layoffs.
Then suddenly that boring savings account feels like the most luxurious thing you own.
It's freedom disguised as cash.
I like that phrase because people usually think freedom comes from spending money.
Sometimes freedom comes from not needing to panic when life surprises you.
And life always has surprises.
The question isn't whether they'll happen, but whether you'll be prepared when they do.
I remember a friend who lost his job and immediately started selling things he'd spent years buying.
That's heartbreaking because the same possessions that once made him feel successful couldn't pay his bills for very long.
Exactly, and it changed the way I looked at ownership.
What changed?
I realized some things drain money every month, while other things quietly protect your future.
That's the difference between a liability and an asset in everyday language.
A liability usually costs you money to keep, while an asset has the potential to grow in value or produce income over time.
And once you start asking whether every purchase moves you closer to freedom or farther away from it, your spending decisions become surprisingly different.
Here's another question people rarely ask themselves. What does your money do after you spend it?
That's a great question because once money leaves your account, it usually starts building someone else's future.
Exactly. And sometimes we're financing another person's wealth instead of creating our own.
You're not saying people should never spend money, right?
Not at all, because spending is part of life. But spending without intention is something completely different.
Intentional spending means your money reflects your priorities instead of your impulses.
That's why two people can spend the exact same amount each month and end up with completely different financial lives.
One person buys things that lose value quickly, while the other gradually buys things that increase their opportunities.
Opportunities are an interesting way to describe it.
Think about learning a valuable skill, starting a small business, or buying equipment that helps you earn more in the future.
So the purchase isn't just an expense.
It's an investment in your ability to generate future income.
That's a mindset shift many people never experience because they only ask what something costs.
The better question is what that purchase might be worth 5 years from now.
I wish more people thought that way before making impulse decisions.
Imagine someone buying a premium coffee every weekday without ever noticing the habit.
The coffee isn't the problem because everyone deserves small pleasures.
The real issue is when hundreds of tiny decisions happen automatically instead of consciously.
Financial success is often hidden inside those ordinary daily choices that nobody else ever sees.
Which means the habits that seem too small to matter today often become the results that are impossible to ignore tomorrow.
Let me challenge another popular belief because I hear it all the time. Rich people take bigger risks.
I don't completely agree because many successful people seem obsessed with reducing unnecessary risk.
Exactly. They often take calculated risks instead of emotional ones.
There's a huge difference between gambling on hope and making an informed decision.
Yet people sometimes confuse confidence with recklessness.
Especially when they only see the successful outcome and not the years of preparation behind it.
That's survivorship bias, where we notice the winners and overlook everyone who tried the same thing without success.
Which is why copying someone's result without understanding their process can be incredibly expensive.
Imagine seeing someone open a successful restaurant and deciding you should do the same next month.
Without asking how many years they spent learning the business, saving capital, or building relationships.
Success stories usually skip the boring chapters.
And those boring chapters often contain the lessons that actually made the success possible.
Patience doesn't make headlines, but it quietly builds remarkable outcomes.
That's true in investing, business, and even careers.
People love overnight success stories because they sound exciting.
But when you look closely, the overnight success usually took 10 or 15 years.
It's almost funny how we celebrate the final chapter while ignoring the entire book.
Maybe that's because consistency isn't dramatic enough for social media.
Yet consistency keeps producing results long after excitement fades.
Which makes me wonder whether discipline is one of the most underrated financial advantages anyone can develop.
Here's something I've been thinking about lately. Why do so many people compare incomes, but almost never compare financial habits?
Probably because income is easy to see while habits happen behind closed doors.
That's why comparing lifestyles can be so misleading.
Social media makes that even worse because people usually post purchases, not bank statements.
Or they'll show the vacation, but never mention they spent the next 6 months paying for it.
That's one reason appearances can become financially expensive.
Trying to look wealthy often delays actually becoming wealthy.
It's strange how often people borrow money to create the impression that they have money.
And the people they're trying to impress are usually too busy worrying about their own finances to notice.
That's one of those truths that sounds obvious after you hear it, but rarely before.
I remember someone saying they upgraded everything after getting promoted because they wanted their life to match their new title.
Did it make them happier?
For a while, but eventually they admitted they felt even more pressure because their monthly expenses had grown faster than their peace of mind.
That's an expensive trade.
It also changes the way you think about your career because suddenly every paycheck has less flexibility.
Which makes it harder to leave a job you don't enjoy or take a chance on a better opportunity.
Financial flexibility is something people underestimate until they lose it.
And once you have it, you realize it isn't just about money, it's about having choices.
Maybe that's the real definition of wealth. Having the freedom to make decisions based on your values instead of your bills.
I couldn't agree more because the richest feeling in the world might not be buying whatever you want, but knowing you don't have to make desperate financial decisions.
Let me throw out another idea that people often misunderstand. Budgeting isn't about restriction.
That's surprising because most people hear the word budget and immediately think about giving things up.
I used to think that too until I realized a budget is simply a plan for where your money goes before someone else decides for you.
So it's less about saying no and more about deciding where to say yes.
Exactly, because every dollar can only do one job at a time.
That's why unplanned spending quietly steals from future goals.
It's almost like making promises with tomorrow's money before tomorrow even arrives.
And tomorrow eventually sends the bill.
I think people also underestimate how much financial stress comes from uncertainty rather than the actual numbers.
That's true because not knowing where your money went often feels worse than seeing the truth.
Once you know the numbers, you can actually improve them.
You can't solve a problem you refuse to measure.
That reminds me of someone who insisted they barely spent on eating out.
Then they checked their bank statements and realized they had spent thousands of dollars over the year without noticing.
The surprising part wasn't the amount.
It was how invisible those small purchases had become.
Small habits rarely feel important on the day they happen.
But repeat them hundreds of times, and they become part of your financial identity.
Which means changing your future sometimes starts with paying closer attention to an ordinary Tuesday.
That's what makes wealth building so interesting because extraordinary results often grow out of remarkably ordinary decisions.
There's one habit I think separates long-term wealth builders from almost everyone else.
Let me guess, they focus more on ownership than consumption.
That's exactly it. Because ownership keeps creating value long after the excitement of buying something disappears.
Which explains why some people spend years collecting assets, while others spend years collecting monthly payments.
Monthly payments have a way of looking small until you add them all together.
Then you realize half your paycheck already has a destination before you've earned it.
That's a stressful way to live because every unexpected expense suddenly feels like a crisis.
Compare that to someone whose monthly obligations stay comfortably below their income.
They don't necessarily earn more.
But they usually sleep better.
Peace of mind might be one of the highest returns money can provide.
And unlike a new gadget, that return doesn't wear off after a few weeks.
Here's something I've noticed in successful business owners.
They don't just ask how much something costs, they ask what problem it solves.
That's a powerful question because solving the right problem can create value for years.
While buying something just because it's on sale can become an expensive mistake.
A discount only saves money if you were already planning to buy the item.
Otherwise, it's just spending less on something you didn't need in the first place.
That's one of those ideas that sounds obvious until you realize how often people ignore it.
And maybe that's why the biggest gap between rich and poor isn't always income, but the everyday habits that quietly shape every financial decision.
If someone asked me for one financial habit to build first, I wouldn't tell them to pick stocks.
Really? Not even if they were eager to start investing?
No, because investing without financial stability often turns every market dip into a personal emergency.
So you'd build the foundation before adding the roof.
Exactly, because a strong financial foundation gives you the confidence to think long-term.
And long-term thinking is where wealth usually has room to grow.
That's the opposite of how many people approach money.
They often chase quick wins because slow progress feels invisible.
Yet invisible progress is still progress.
Think about learning to play an instrument because nobody notices the improvement from one practice session to the next.
But after a year, everyone notices the difference.
Wealth works much the same way because consistency compounds even when it doesn't feel exciting.
That also explains why comparison can be so dangerous.
You're comparing your daily routine to someone else's highlight reel.
And you never see the sacrifices that happen behind the scenes.
Or the mistakes they made before things finally started working.
That's why I respect people who quietly improve their finances without needing anyone else's approval.
There's something powerful about making decisions that your future self will appreciate, even if nobody else ever notices.
Maybe that's the biggest lesson from this entire conversation. Wealth isn't built through a handful of dramatic moments, but through thousands of ordinary choices made with intention.
And those ordinary choices are available to almost everyone, which means changing your financial future often begins with the very next decision you make.
Looking back, it's amazing that we barely talked about chasing more money, yet we spend hours talking about treating money differently.
Maybe that's because earning more is important, but keeping and growing what you earn is what changes your life.
And neither of those happens by accident.
They're built one decision at a time, especially when nobody is watching.
I think that's the part people underestimate because small decisions never feel powerful in the moment.
Yet enough small decisions eventually become a completely different financial reality.
Imagine meeting your future self 20 years from now.
I wonder if they'd thank us for the expensive things we forgot about or the smart choices that quietly created freedom.
I think they'd remember the freedom.
Me too. Because freedom has a way of outlasting almost every purchase.
Which means being rich isn't just about having more.
It's about needing less to feel secure and having more options when opportunities appear.
That's a definition of wealth I wish more people heard growing up.
Because it shifts the goal from impressing strangers to building a life that actually feels peaceful.
And peace is difficult to measure, but incredibly easy to recognize once you have it.
So perhaps the biggest money habit isn't saving, investing, or budgeting by itself.
It's learning to make decisions that consistently favor your future over your impulses.
When you do that often enough, wealth becomes less of a destination and more of a natural consequence.
That's probably the simplest explanation for the difference between rich and poor habits that we've discussed today.
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe for more thoughtful discussions on money, investing, business, and building long-term wealth, because the best financial decisions often begin with a single new perspective.